Welcome to this video where we are going to take a look at all the conditions that we have available currently inside Zoe to create our own interaction. So conditions are kind of a trigger that is something that needs to be happening, validated to start the action attached to your interaction. That's why I'm saying it's kind of a trigger. You can have as much conditions as you want. So let's say you had 5 conditions, you will have to get these 5 conditions validate before the action to happen. So we are going to start with the duration. Duration is actually, it's more of a parameter than a condition. It's a parameter that we can find in almost all the conditions. This is a parameter that lets you choose the minimum time a condition needs to be met in order to be considered validated, kind of. So for example, you can think about that. A user would need to gaze towards the door for at least 2 seconds in order to open the door, for example. So the action would be the door is opening. The condition would be the user need to gaze at the door. But the minimum length, the duration, would be at least 2 seconds. So it would calculate 2 seconds at least to let the user open the door by gazing at the door. And just so you know, if you create an interaction with several conditions and you use this duration parameter in one of the conditions, you should use it on the other condition as well, otherwise it might not work. Then you can also customize what happens if the condition turns false before the end of this duration. So let's say we have this 2 second duration to open the door, but let's say we just gaze towards the door for 1 second. So what happens in that case? So here we can do a couple of things. We can decide to reset the count. So basically it goes back to 0. So we need to gaze again for 2 full seconds towards the door to open it. We can keep the progress. So in that case, if we watched 1.5 seconds the door, we stop looking at it, we look at it again. We just need to look at it again for half a second to fulfill this condition. Or we can decrease progressively as well. So this parameter duration is pretty useful. It allows you to be very creative in how you set up your conditions and how you create your experience. So you can use this duration parameter, how it fits for your needs. Then we have the gaze condition actually. So we started to talk a bit about the gaze condition in our previous example, in the duration parameter example. But basically gazing is when you look at an object in VR inside Unity and using Zoe. So yeah, there are a couple of things in here. There is the target object. So you have to decide what is the target, what is the things you want to gaze at. And this target object needs to be an interactive object. We have a full video about how to create an interactive object. And then you can decide the mode. So you can decide if you have to gaze at the object or to gaze away from the object. So you can decide that we have to gaze at an object, or we have to turn our head off to not look at the object. And you can choose the minimum duration as well. The gaze condition uses a gaze collider that is attached to the interactive object that you use as your target object. We explained this in another video when we explained the hierarchy and the structure of an interactive object. But basically, an interactive object has a gaze collider, which is by default, it's a 3D cube around your object. And so that's what we use to detect that we are gazing at the object. How it works is that we have some kind of camera that represents our eyes and what we see. We calculate the direction, the way that we are looking at. So if I'm looking like that, I know that it's that direction. And so I can detect that direction and where the object is. And if the direction and the collider of the object is matching, it knows that I'm gazing at that object. Then you have the point and click condition. So to use this condition, you need to make sure that the interactive object that you want to use point and click condition on has the enable manipulation option checked inside the inspector of that interactive object. You have a section where you can check enable manipulation and you can choose the mode of manipulation and you would choose point and click. This is something you need to do in order to be able to use the point and click condition on an interactive object. And then you can choose how it's going to work. So you can choose point or point and trigger. So basically you have your controller in VR. And so inside Unity and Zoe, you have a laser that goes from this controller that you see in VR, your hand, and you see a laser. And this laser, we can decide its length and several parameters. We explained that in a former video where we explain how to set up and use Zoe inside Unity. So you have a laser coming from your controller in VR. And so when we want to use the point option for the point and click, it means that this laser is going to touch the interactive object. If we choose point and trigger, we need to point and our laser touch the object, and also we press the trigger. So we need both kind of condition to make this work. We can choose if it's the left controller, right controller, either, or both. If you put both, you cannot have the trigger also. It will be just both controller that needs to point at the object. Then you have a mode parameter when you can choose. Then you can choose if the condition is met when you point and press the trigger towards the object, or when you release the trigger from pointing the object. You can choose. And for the target object, you can choose one target or several targets for this same condition. And the condition will be validated as soon as you point and trigger at one of the targets in your list of targets. So you can start with only one target to get used to, but later on you can add several targets if it fits your needs. And the condition will be met as soon as you point and trigger or point trigger away from one of these targets. Also, this point and click condition use one of the collider that is attached to our interactive object. I think it's the hand over one. So if at some point you want to change the size of this collider also, you can change the size of this collider that will impact this condition. So you could make it bigger or smaller, for example. And so you have more or less flexibility between the laser and the object to detect and to make this point and click condition valid. Then we have the proximity condition, and it's about the proximity, the distance between two or more interactive objects. So you have different modes that you can set up. So you can have the enter or the exit mode. So it means that as soon as the one interactive object is close enough to another one, the condition would be met. Or as soon as one interactive object is far enough from the other one, the condition is met. And for that, we have to give it a max distance. That is the distance we use to calculate if it's close enough or far enough, basically. Once again, to make this happen, we use colliders, the collider called proximity that is attached to our interactive object to calculate this distance, this max distance. So by default, it uses the center of these colliders because these colliders are normally centered on our interactive object, so it makes sense to take the center. But if it's better, if it fits your need, you can choose that instead of taking the center of these colliders, you can take the edge if it makes more sense for your project, for example. And finally, you can add more than two objects. So you can add a list of interactive objects that needs to be like close enough or far enough to make this condition valid. And you can even decide if you need all of them to be close or far enough, or only two of them in the list. You can think about, for example, let's say you want to cook something in VR, and you say, I want the onion, the pasta, and the water, all of them close to each other inside the cooking pot to create my pasta recipe. For example, if there is only the water and the pasta close enough, it's not going to make the recipe, for example. Then we have the touch condition, where I think it's pretty straightforward based on its name. So it detects when you touch an interactive object with your controller in VR. So you can choose if it's the left, the right, either, or both of the controller. And there are two modes basically. There is a touch and untouch mode. So touch, as the name says, you need to touch the object. And untouch is when you stop touching the object, But obviously, to make it work, it's check that first you are touching it and then you are untouching it. Otherwise, it would happen everywhere in your scene because you are not touching everything at the beginning, you know. So, in order to the untouched condition to work, you first need to be touching the object. And when you stop touching it, it will make the condition valid. Then we have the manipulate condition. That is something you might use quite a lot. So this condition check if we are grabbing or using levitate. So it check basically if we are manipulating the interactive object. So when you set up an interactive object, you have an option to choose the manipulation mode. And inside that manipulation mode, you can choose grab or levitate, or also point and click. In that case, we are focusing on grabs and levitate. And so this condition, this manipulate condition, is based on the grab or levitate manipulation mode. You once again, you have to choose how it works. So is it the left controller, the right controller, or either the left or right, you can say. For the moment, you cannot use both controller to manipulate. It's not working. So it means you cannot create a two-hand axe to chop wood for the moment, for example. You could create one two-handed axe, but you would have to use it with one hand. Then the mode. So in the mode, we can choose between manipulate or manipulate and hold. So manipulate is kind of the default one. It means you have to grab or to levitate the object in order to make this condition valid. If you choose manipulate plus hold, it's usually because you have an extra condition, at least, to your interaction. So let's say you want to be able to grab an object, and then you want to know that you pressed on a button, for example. So let's think about that. You have a flashlight. You want to grab it, and then you want to press a button to turn on the light of the flashlight. So in that case, you would select manipulate plus hold. And if you select release, then it means you are kind of already manipulating the object, grabbing or levitating, and you release the object. And that would be the how you validate that condition. You release the object from the manipulation. Once again, you can choose the target object that you are going to manipulate, so one or several. Then we have the input condition. So this is a condition that we check if we are pressing any of the button of the controller. So you can see on the screen, if I scroll a bit, you have all of these options with the joystick, Y or B, X, A, menu, trigger, grip. So basically, to create this input condition, you would say it's the left controller or the right controller. You would choose which button is going to create that condition. And you can even choose if you have to touch it, stop touching it, pressing it, or releasing the button. Usually you might use press or release. And you can also add several buttons in this condition. So you can say, I want to press this trigger and also press A or X, for example. I need to press both to make this condition valid, for example. Then we have the drop condition. So this is a special condition, kind of. It's available for the drag and drop system. So you need to enable the drag and drop system when you set up your interactive object in order to be able to use that drop condition. So if you have an interactive object with the drag and drop system enabled on it, you can use the drop condition. It will check basically in which phase of the drag and drop this interactive object is. So you would have to say which object is the object that should be manipulated to be dropped, you would choose. And then you would choose the mode. So we have drop, ready to drop, cancel drop, or remove. So drop would be like the object has been dropped inside the target or the interactive object target. Ready to drop, it would detect that it's close enough to the drop zone, but not yet dropped. Cancel drop, it detects also this dropping zone, but you are moving away from the dropping zone. And remove would be the object that has been removed from the target. So for example, maybe once the object is dropped, it's going to disappear. And so it's removed from the target, for example. And so, of course, you have to decide what is the target object as well, the interactive object that is going to act as the target. We will have a full video on the drag and drop system. So this is just a presentation of the drop condition, but you can find more information about the drag and drop system in another video. Then we have the approach condition. So this is similar to the proximity condition, but basically it's between an interactive object and you, the user, inside the scene, inside the experience. So you can say, you can choose if it's when you enter or exit. So when you get close enough to an interactive object or far enough from an interactive object. Of course, you can choose this distance that will make it enter or exit. And it even used the same collider for proximity conditions, so the same proximity collider. And you can add more than one target. Once again, for this condition to be validated, so you could have only one or a list of targets that you need to be close enough or far away enough from to make it valid. So you can say I have 5 targets. I need to be close enough from the 5, or one of the 5 is enough, for example. And then we have finally the collision condition, as it names stand. It's when 2 or more objects collide or stop colliding. Basically, a collision is when the 2 objects or more they are really like touching, they are colliding. So it's not just they are at a 5-meter distance or something. No, they are really touching each other. So this is a collision. So you can choose once again if they are touching or they are stopping to touch. I will say touch, but a collision. And yeah, you can decide if it's 2 objects or more that are colliding or stopping to collide to make this condition valid. So that's the end of the video, where we get an overview of all the conditions that we can use to create an interaction. We will see in other videos each of these conditions with an example on how to do that inside Unity. So if you're interested, you can see the other videos specifically about each condition, how to set it up inside the project, inside the Unity project. In the next video, we are going to see the actions. What are all of the actions that you can add to your interaction? The action being what's going to happen once the conditions are met. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.